Thank you very much for the presentation. Good evening, everyone. My name is Christian Delsol. I'd like to thank Emily and Chesa and School of Visual Arts for inviting me tonight to share my experiences working at the United Nations and collaborating with the creative community to create messages on these very topical issues. As they explained my background, I studied cultural anthropology and then economic anthropology. I started working at the UNFPA, the United Nations Population Fund, one of the UN specialized agencies. I'm sure you all know about UNICEF. UNFPA is another specialized agency, not as well known, but our mandate is quite unique. Our mandate is to advocate for population issues. Population issues is not about too many people, so I want to correct that. If anybody thinks it is, it isn't. Population is about individual rights to determine when and how many children you want and have access to family planning. And as he said before, population issues is about ensuring that every pregnancy is wanted, every childbirth is safe, and every young person's potential is fulfilled. From a human rights perspective, population issues is about reproductive health, about reproductive rights, access to family planning, the end of harmful practices such as child marriage, which I think every single day there's 39,000 girls who are married before the age of 18. Female genital mutilation. Currently there's 68 million girls who are at risk of female genital mutilation. To give you an idea, for example, in Egypt, the prevalence of FGM is 90%. And then the third issue is sex selection or femicide. Many parents want to have a boy and they abort the girls. And so there's a disproportion, there's an incredible imbalance between the amount of boys and girls, and especially in Asia. And I'll just give you one example of a hard life. In Afghanistan, or I should say not women but girls often get married before they're 18 and they're deprived of their education and their autonomy. They give birth on average to about 7 children each. Some less, but that means some of them much more than 7. So you can imagine what it means for women to give birth to 7 children. Usually they have a short lifespan. So at UNFPA, we advocate for these issues with data. We try to get this covered in the news. We try to speak directly to decision makers, both in the donor community, meaning the rich countries who give funds to initiate these programs, and also we speak to influencers in program countries. We work a lot with the religious leaders, with the mullahs, with the village chiefs, with midwives, people who have influence. The reality is that today men still hold more power than women. Therefore, we need to engage men to be part of the activities and to communicate these messages for us. We also, these are programs what I'm speaking about, but also at headquarters we communicate visually. And here I'll try to make one obvious point. You can only communicate one message when you're presenting something. And I'll give you 2 examples. There was a book that was written a couple of years ago. It's called The Better Angels of Nature by Steven Pinker. I think it's about 800 pages long. It only has one message. And everything afterwards is about substantiating the message. So just one message. Or the book by Thomas Piketty, which is called Capital. It's over 1,000 pages, and again, there's only one message. It's the increased disparity between the very wealthy and the rest of the world. So we're trying to use that same approach when we develop our visual messages, which is to have just one message. It follows the same principle. One memorable message that can be repeated. So we want people, when they see the message in written format, that they appropriate the message and they repeat it constantly. And my goal when I work with designers, the major goal of a poster, for example, was to have the viewer learn something new, whether it be data, whether it be a fact. And to date, I have never worked with a public relations firm, nor an advertising firm, but uniquely with independent design boutiques. Because I find I get a much better job out of it. There's a poster over here with the hands around it. That was the first poster I had worked on. I had worked with that poster in 1992. It was done by Pat Gorman. Pat Gorman is the founder of a design firm called Manhattan Design, also known for their iconic MTV logo. And that poster was distributed at the Environment Conference held in Rio de Janeiro in September of 1992, and it was very, very successful. The poster has one message. It places humans with their hands at the center of the discussion when we're addressing our increased consumption of natural resources, or finite resources, I should say. As an aside, I just wanted to let you know what I've learned from Pat Gorman, the one who did that poster, is that we're allowed to break all the rules and rigidity governing a logo. The MTV logo can be dressed in polka dots, with flowers, with bricks, with clouds, with sneakers on. It can be animated. It doesn't matter what its rendition is. It's always recognized as the MTV logo, even though there are hundreds and hundreds of variation. And she broke the mold, Pat Gorman, who did that first poster. So that was my first lesson in design, I think. A couple of years later, I had worked with a design firm called Bureau. They renamed themselves Bureau. First they were called Grand Fury, and they did a poster which is a pink triangle which was reversed, and it says silence equals death. And I think that's quite most people know that message. So it's political design. They both teach at Yale University. And they produce a series of posters for us, like the monochromatic one, which is on the top in the center, which just has one message. It's very, very simple. And then a couple of years later, I had worked with another design firm called Real Design. And they did this, for me, it's a stunning poster. It's the one that's up on the PowerPoint over here. What I find remarkable about this poster is that the image is larger than life, or life-size if you want. There's a direct connection between the subject. There's eye contact with the subject. That photo, by the way, was taken by Steve McCurry, sorry. He's also well known for having taken the photo of the Afghan girl with the green eyes that appeared on the covers of National Geographic. So we collaborated between the designers, the photographer, got this photo, and put that tagline on the top. That sentence, life or death is a political decision, is exactly what I'm referring to. It's something that you can remember, and you will repeat it if you get into a conversation. Somebody talks about gender equality. You say, yes, these are political decisions that we have to speak about. So it's the message that somebody can capture and repeat. The second poster over here, it's done by the same company, Real Design. And when I spoke to them, when I was giving them art direction, I was heavily influenced by a film I had just seen, which was done by, which is called The Pillar Book by Peter Greenaway. And here it is. This is just a still from the film. And what you see on it is writing on the body. I find this to be extremely powerful and to communicate a message. Because once you inscribe text on the skin, that means you belong to society and you can no longer escape it. And I'll make a little additional point over here. If we talk about female genital mutilation, it's the same issue. It's writing on the body, it's carving on the body. And once it's there, you can't remove it. And you can't escape it, and you belong to that particular group, that tribal group, for example, that would have markings. That's it. You can't remove it from your body. It's like people in concentration camps, they had tattoos on them. and they stay there. So writing on the body symbolically worked a lot. Over here, she's talking about human rights on her face. So that's how this poster came about, working with the designers. Okay, I'm going to go to one of the things I've learned in working with designers. Over here, I had worked with a company called Artworks Project. You can see over here this in the center. That was at the Rotunda in Congress, the U.S. Capitol. We not only do I try to make sure that the designers have enough space to make sure that the human beings represented, the people in the artwork, are at least life-size, if not bigger. It creates a really powerful intimacy with it. And this particular exhibit was on gender-based violence in the Democratic Republic of Congo. One of the images is the third one, or the first one on the right, the one that's, anyway, there's a bench. When the exhibit was up, some people fell to the ground. They thought it was a real bench, and they went to it. And it's just, that's how important size is, especially if you have human size. You're not sure if it's an image you're looking at or if you're really confronting somebody. But we want to also make sure that the subjects in these photos, over here, in these photos over here, and the two that I showed you previously, and I'll go back to it. These two photos, these girls don't have names. They don't say anything. But eventually, as I moved on with how do I get back my mouse here? I want to click up here. Oh, there it is. Yeah, it's this one. Green. Thank you.
Yeah.
So the big difference as I was moving forward and working with designers is that we started using people's names in the description. So they had a first name and they had last name. We gave their age, but more importantly, we started attributing quotes to them. We weren't saying anymore what we wanted to say, but at this stage, it was in 2008, we had the people in the photos themselves, we would publish a quote from them. They have something to say. This is what we did for the Congo Women exhibit on gender-based violence. This is what we did also with this exhibit that Marie knows very well. Here we go. All of these girls in these images have names, or we know where they're from, but they all have quotes. And that, for me, was a new lesson I learned when doing representation of these very sensitive issues. They're larger than life. It's like this one over here in the center. That's Desmond Tutu. This exhibit was designed by Marie Nakano, who's sitting right over here. There's this girl over here sitting next to her husband. I think she's 11 years old. Oh. So when I would go to the exhibit and just walk around and see how people were reacting to these images, which were quite large, we had a lot of people stomping their feet, like in anger, because 39,000 girls a day go through this. It's enormous. And it's a very sensitive issue. It has to do with the body. It's very intimate. It's beyond human rights. It's individual rights. It's a step ahead of that. And it's sometimes we have to deal with other sensitive issues like female genital mutilation. I mean, there's something we've learned a lot from UNICEF, which is never show, or try not to show, kids with flies on their face and snot coming out of their nose. It doesn't work in communication. You can't show, you can't bring empathy if you're showing just simply a problem. We try to show people and represent them as people being autonomous, of having power, of having a voice, of having a quote attributed to them. We want to show to our public and the decision makers and the people who give out the money and the people who are going to change the laws, we want to show them that we have the solutions and we know what needs to be done. So we don't want to show images of depravity anymore, and that's in our style guide. You don't show people in masses, you show individuals. And this was, as we're progressing in making images for our issues, we've moved ahead from those simple posters of generic photos to photos of people, and then after that, people with names, and then people with names in quotes. So that was that's the way we made progress in representation. And for example, I've taken the same approach. Several years ago, my deputy executive director asked me to decorate a conference room with posters. She just wanted to have it dressed up. Well, I call that wallpaper. But anyway, I complied. I said, of course, I'll give you a lot of posters, but let me teach you something about the girls who are going to be on those posters. One of the girls on the poster, her name is Debuti. She's from Ethiopia. She escaped from female genital mutilation in her country. She went to the city. She fell into the sex trade. She gets beaten up, and she has something like 70 clients a day. And that's part of the description on the poster. So she has a name, and she wanted to tell a story. Because there's a lot of ethical issues. You can't just photograph something like this and without their consent. This one over here, these are again very young girls, they're 13. These are their husbands, and you can see how, you can imagine how young they are. And this is in Yemen. By the way, child marriage is not a developing country issue solely. You have it in Utah in the US, you have it in Brooklyn. The French king, Josephine Bonaparte, the wife of Napoleon Bonaparte, was 16 years old when she got wedded. So it was quite common throughout all of Europe and throughout the whole world, but it's still prevalent, more prevalent now in developing countries. But before it was all over the world, and it still happens in the US and it happens in France. But anyway, so I gave the story of these two girls and the one before that. I gave them to my deputy executive director, and I asked her to integrate these images in her speech. So the posters were no longer just posters on the wall like wallpaper. When she gave a speech, she spoke about Djibouti and she spoke about the Yemeni girls, and it was integral in her speech, and it worked. And it worked. People really looked at it, and they had a name. I saw somebody. I remember this person. So it made a huge difference for the audience. A new approach I started in 2011, I think. Yeah, 2011 and 2012. I had worked with a photojournalist. Her name is Stephanie St. Clair, and with a videographer, her name is Jessica Demac. They both come out of a photo agency called 7, Roman numeral 7. And she asked me for art direction. I says, the only thing I'm going to ask you is to make sure that there isn't a single commentary in the video. There's no third-person commentary, there's no voiceover, none of that exists. It's all narrated at the first person. So that was again another lesson learned. Beyond quotes and all of that is to remove an interpretation. an outside interpretation. So you can see as we're making progress in developing visual materials from the standard like that to faces, and then faces with names and quotes, and then only first quotes and no commentary, and that's very powerful. This video won many awards, by the way, because it's just very, very powerful story. And carrying this process to the extreme, in 2016, I produced a virtual reality film. It was shot in a Syrian refugee camp in Jordan. And we asked our colleagues on the ground to identify 3 pregnant women who were most likely to give birth while the crew was going to be in Jordan. And to give consent, and we filmed all 3 of them. We only used 2 at the end, but we filmed all 3 of them before they gave birth, at birthing, and post. And they tell their stories. What's interesting about the film Destaye and this virtual reality film is the point of view of the 360 film is that you cannot film somebody narrating their life in front of the camera. So it's a different approach. You need to have something going all around. And you're positioned in the middle, or the camera is, and your viewer needs to become curious and to explore what's going on. And again, this uses the same approach. There's no third-party voiceover. It's only the protagonists in the film narrating their lives at the first person. This makes the film credible, obviously, makes it intimate. There's one scene in the film where the mother is cooking. She's in her tent, and she's cooking a pot, and she's stirring soup. And when people wear the goggles that you have to wear to watch the virtual reality movie, I knew they were all watching that particular scene because they will all go like this and peek at the soup to see what was being cooked. So that's, I wanted to first deliver to you this approach is to explain to you how I evolved my thinking in terms of developing visual materials with messages, and then no longer messages but with quotes, etc., and then completely remove any additional commentary. But most of my work, working with the designers and working with the creative community, was absolutely great. It was fun. The hard part was working internally with the administration. And this is where it becomes interesting for me. I have to write contracts. I have to go through a procurement process. I have to go through audits. I have to deal with copyright issues. I have to deal with unsolicited proposals from video producers, photographers, designers. And just to let you know that the UN is responsible, it has to explain how it spends its money. So we have quite strict procurement procedures. Usually, a staff initiates a request for proposal, RFP. The RFP is then sent to our procurement colleagues who are based in Copenhagen. They post the terms of reference online at a marketplace of the UN, and they also send the request for proposals directly to vendors that the requesting officer may recommend. Or if the RFP is really, it's singularly for a service, and then it's no longer a procurement process, it becomes a human resource exercise for a consultant. So those are 2 different things. If you're ever thinking of working for the UN, you just can't approach them like that. They'll say, the idea is not ours. I accept ideas from others, by the way. Yeah? But usually at the UN, we have to come up with the idea. It's not our specialty. Usually the UN buys Toyota cars, contraceptives, medical equipment, tents. It buys finished products. And what I've been working with is engaging creative community in a process. So I don't know exactly how it's going to come out at the end. So it's quite complicated for that. Huh? We also need to give them our procurement office an estimated cost in advance. How much is it going to cost to do this video? How much is it going to cost to do this poster? because if it goes above a certain amount, it has to go through a sealed bidding process. In a committee, it has to be in a conference room, and usually the project is awarded to the lowest bidder. And you can imagine how this can create a very, very uneven playing field. Because if you invite, I don't know, somebody to do coding for you, if the person is based in the US, they're going to charge you a hell of a lot more if they're based in India. So how do you do international procurement like that? You try and get people who have the same capacity, who are in the same environment, so what they're competing for is for the content, and price is no longer, shouldn't be the sole deciding factor. I'll give you an example. I invited a number of video producers, and it was put on the global market, to submit proposals and budgets for a series of 4 video productions. The price ranged between $95,000 and $105,000. I made a case for the highest quote, but the director of finance division overruled me, saying that we will go to the lowest bidder. And he looked at me and he signed the paper and asked me to leave the room, and another person was going to come in, and I just raised my hand. I says, I'd like to add something to the minutes. The person at 95,000, that video is going to sit on a shelf. The one at 105,000 is going to be broadcast on BBC. And I took my bag and I left the room. He ran after me. He called me back into the room. He asked the note taker, the minute taker, to strike my comments from the minutes. And the director of finance made the decision to go for 105,000. Okay, I'll give you some insight of a lot of things I hear inside the UN. And this is what happens on the other side. This is how people at the UN speak about the creative community. Why can they not do it for free? After all, this is a good cause. I hear that constantly, still today. Tell them we will post it on the UN. They can use it in their portfolio. Do it for free. Merde. Why should we pay for it? After all, these artists cannot help themselves from creating. It's beyond their control. We're giving them an outlet. I've heard this too. I'm sure you have too as well, right? This one is a good one. This video is too long. Can we just cut out the first 30 seconds and the last 20 seconds? Can you imagine doing that to a book? Take out the first chapter and last chapter. But I mean, I'm sincere, and these are highly paid professionals who say things like that. Just cut out this part and that part. Your whole narrative collapses. Don't repeat this, huh? The other thing is, just like the posters that I put on the wall, a lot of people have asked me, can you produce a video, Christian, so we can play it as people walk into the room? That's wallpaper again. No, I refuse to. I'll say no. I said no. You're having a meeting because, and when people are walking in the room, it's time for you to socialize, to meet them. Nobody's going to look at the video. If I produce a video, it has to be integral in the program. It has to be announced. The room has to be silenced. The video is played. And the commentator or the conference person needs to make reference to the video that was shown. That's called a keynote video. But anyway, I still get a lot of just do it so we can show it as people, so people have something to do. It doesn't make sense. And of course, the most common thing I hear is, can the designer do something great? Full stop. That's it. So they don't give you materials to work with. They don't tell you what the angst is. Or when something's in progress, they say, can you throw in an animation on top of the video graphics? And they never consider price. They forget that people, they forget that they are on salary. Therefore, they can work. And they forget that when we contract outside, it's out of scope. therefore you have to change the contract. And I always intervene when the colleagues ask for more. I says, fine, of course we can. Ask them if they are willing, if they have time, if they don't have other clients, and then we amend the contract and we go back to procurement, change it, and then you can add your new terms of references. Other things I've heard from a video shoot, oh, it's great, but can we reshoot it from the other angle? And like, we just shot this in Jordan, I'm not going back. So there's a miscomprehension of the creative process, of assets, and what you can do with them and not do with them. Of course, the other one is people like to mix all different type of typefaces, and that's absolutely horrible. It's not punk. It just doesn't work. It doesn't work. I mean, unless you're doing punk, but this is not punk. And the one that I heard recently is, we are the ones paying for it, so we tell them what to do. And I asked my colleague, well, what do you want? They don't know. They don't know. They'll entertain a conversation, and it's up to the designer or the creative person to pull all this information out from them. But initially, they have no idea, but they like to be in a position where they can, where they appropriate themselves of the finished product at the end. And that first poster that I showed to you, I had worked a lot with Pat on this one, with Pat Gorman. And soon after it was produced, I was walking by the Deputy Executive Director's office. His son was in his dad's office. I knew him, he called me in, and he looks at me with a big smile and he says, look what my dad just did. His dad was not involved in any part of the project at all, but he told that to his own son. He lied to his son. I was involved in that project, and I told the son. I said, no, your dad didn't do it. So anyway, there's little, I mean, there's a lot of appropriation, little understanding of the skill sets, the creative process, especially when the client says, oh, it's easy, they should be able to do it. It's like desktop publishing, you know. So people think that you don't need skills, you don't need to go to college, you don't need to go to university, you don't need to learn about design, about balance, about colors, messaging. It's easy. You know, ask a gymnast if it's easy. It's not true. It takes a lot of work. So with this, what I've learned is that a lot of colleagues also ask for editorial control, especially for narrative work, whether it be photos or videos. This is fine. You can, the client has right to have some editorial control, but there's a major barrier that just drops on you when the client has editorial control, and that comes in the area of publishing. Because my overall goal is to make sure that the images and the videos and the stories appear and get published in the mass media. The independent media. Outside of the UN's owned platforms, meaning its Twitter accounts, its Facebook, its Instagram accounts. So I always encourage photographers and videographers to self-publish and push their content as news. And the only way they can, and I don't have editorial control, and in all of our communication, I never tell them what to do. I give them the general idea, but it's up to them to come up with the narrative. They become the authors, and I'll never take it away from them. And because they are authors, when they see an editor at Time Magazine, New York Times, Washington Post, BBC, they have an ethical obligation of disclosure to tell their independent editors if a client had intervened in the messaging. And I'm completely transparent, no, we did not. And that's how we got a whole series published on BBC, on Euronews, is because we respected that independence from the creative community. And then afterwards, of course, we can post this work and the videos and the photos on our site, because at first the authors have copyright. Therefore, when they have legal copyright to their work. Therefore, when they push it on the independent media, they can rightfully and legally say they have the copyright. Once it's first published, and then we can reverse the contract and have shared rights or usage rights or full rights, and then publish it on our Instagram, on our Facebook pages. And this is my preferred way of working. It hasn't gone down very well with some of my colleagues who want immediate control of it, and they put it on the website, and nobody goes to our website. However, when I work with a photojournalist who has 1 million followers, or 500,000, and there are some we work with who have that many followers, it gets seen by their colleagues and their peers, another photojournalist, another journalist. That's my goal. It's not to own the product, it's to publish it. So that issue of copyright and usage right is really, really important, as well as editorial control over the story. Once I give a contract like that, there is a major risk. I can give somebody $45,000, go film something for me in Ethiopia, but there's nothing in the contract that obligates them to film something on gender equality issues or whatever. I have no editorial input. So it's my hope, and it's based on trust, that they'll do it. But they can also come back and film a soccer match, and I'm stuck, and there's nothing legally I can do to sue them and get back the money. So it's a little bit risky, but I've never had a problem with that. What we can offer to those independent creative community, of course, is access to hard-to-reach places and locations, and most importantly is to give them data and facts, because when they do their story, they'll say, according to UNFPA, 39,000 girls get, that's it, I've done my branding. It's in the story. That's all I need to make my bosses happy. So a little bit of branding. Otherwise, if you do a heavily editorialized video, you'll always see the UNFPA logo smack in the center of the photo. They usually will film the service provider, not the client. And nobody outside of our owned social media will publish that, because it's propaganda. So it defeats the purpose. I mean, there is a purpose. We need to have those photos, but they don't need to be heavily branded, because we're cutting ourselves out of reaching a very, very large public. And this is how we publish in the New York Times. I think there were 4 pieces, 7 pages each. I don't think UNICEF has even managed that. We've published Time Magazine, National Geographic, BBC World, Euronews, etc., etc. So anyway, I want to make sure, I mean, it's fine. The UN can toot its own horn, but it lacks independence, credibility, because again, it's propaganda. So that's why I try to first make sure and ensure that gets pushed out to the mass media. And then after that, we can go and say, somebody else said this about me. Somebody else said something about the UN. That's a lot more powerful than the UN saying something about itself. Now, this is a fairly complicated one. I also get unsolicited proposals. Meaning somebody has a good idea, has a good project, they want to do some good humanitarian work on human rights issues and all of that. The work sounds great. But according to our procurement rules, usually the idea has to be an internal idea, has to be vetted, and we put out the request for proposal. We're not designers. How can we write the RFP? It's complicated. So I start accepting a lot of unsolicited proposal. And the way it works around procurement, all I have to do is be able to demonstrate repeatedly with quotes that I can get on the web, that their price is within standard industry practice. Meaning, for example, for a video, I know it's between $5,000 and $8,000 per minute for a finished product. For design work, I would look at, for example, at the guidebook from AIGA. And just say, these are the quotes, this is what's recommended by standard industry, therefore this outside vendor is within that standard, therefore we can write a contract, we're not being taken for a ride. Okay. By the way, this is, as I was speaking about large size and things like that, this is one of the last projects I did at UNFPA. In a way, it was a bit unsolicited. I had worked with this collective called Disturb. And what they do is they use the most social of spaces, which is not social media, it's the streets. And they do billboard-sized posters with messages. And I can't find my mouse.
Just escape, that's what I
So they put up all these posters throughout New York City, and then they did them again in Paris. This is where they put them in New York City, in the streets. The idea is that news organizations will see this and they'll write an article. Who put up these posters? So it's basically trying to rely on echoes, and hopefully it gets published further around. And then they put them inside the UN, and they put them outside on the streets again in Soho. How much time do I have? Okay, I think I'm done right now. I just touched very lightly on some subjects, you know, administrative subjects and things like that, but also the evolution of thinking, you know, throughout several years at UNFPA. Thank you so much for listening, everyone.